evolved over time, yet we continue to face important methodological and analytical questions. How do we refine our theoretical foundations? How do we strengthen our analytical tools? How do we ensure relevance in addressing contemporary economic challenges? So this structured review project provides a valuable platform to revisit foundational ideas critically and constructively. I'm especially pleased to see such a distinguished panel of reviewers that are gathering here today, whether physically or online. Your diverse expertise and perspectives will certainly enrich today's discussion. Constructive critique is a sign of a healthy academic tradition, and our scholarly heritage in Islam has always thrived through respectful dialogue and intellectual exchange. So in today's global environment marked by inequality, financial instability, and ethical concern, the search for alternative economic paradigms is more urgent than ever. So Islamic economics has much to offer, but its strength depends on rigorous scholarship and continuous refinement. So this workshop is therefore timely and important. So my special thanks go to our moderator and editor, Associate Professor Dr. Muhammad Aslam Akbar, for steering this important effort with dedication and care. And also to Brother Hafiz, who has been working very hard to organize this workshop. And of course to Professor Mabid Al-Jarhi for his enduring contributions to the field and for his openness to structured scholarly review. I also would like to express my sincere appreciation to all our distinguished reviewers. Despite your demanding schedules and numerous commitments, you have generously agreed to take on this intellectually rigorous task. Your willingness to contribute your time, expertise, and thoughtful critique truly reflects your commitment to advancing the scholarship of Islamic economics. We are deeply grateful for your support and engagement. To all participants, hopefully we can engage in this discussion openly, critically, and respectfully. Let us benefit from one another's insights and ensure that today's deliberation contribute meaningfully to the advancements of the Islamic economics thought. With that, I once again welcome all of you and pray that our discussion will be productive, insightful, and blessed. Bi'idhnillah. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Norma, for a meaningful welcoming remark. So now we are moving to our next agenda. Our next agenda is inviting our distinguished reviewers to talk about their chapters that has given to them for review. But before that, before I call them here, I invite them here to present. I would like to tell you what is this project all about, because some of you still not clear that what exactly we are doing, isn't it? So that's why now is the briefing given by the moderator myself, and also going to be editing the work that I'm going to collect from the reviewers. So what exactly this work? This is a book written by Professor Mabid. I would love to ask Hafiz if you can just open his book. I hope I gave you the book. Would you please open the book and show to the audience what is that book and how many pages? What is it that we are discussing here? Then slowly I will tell you what exactly we are doing on this project. Okay. Please. Okay, what about the book? Okay, so this is the book, basically the economic analysis and Islamic perspective, very simple name, but very huge more than 500 pages. By the way, this is just only the volume number 1. There is another volume. This volume itself, it has a 19 chapters, almost 19 chapters. Um, do you mind opening the PDF, the book itself? Yeah, the book itself. Perhaps I can show them how the book look like. So I would like to start with introducing the book to you. And then I would like to also start with appreciating the IFFI. What is IFFI? The International Federation of Islamic Economics and Finance. It means that wherever you see that there are institutes, there are centers in the name of Islamic economics, they all come together under one umbrella, and it is called IFFI. And currently, you are seeing as the secretary for this federation, and we are the secretary, and we are Center for Islamic Economics. So this is called CIE. And this CIE is the secretary. But you have so many other institutes comes under this federation. And then I would like to also show this book. Okay, so this is the book. Can you go down, scroll down? Just go to the contents, table of contents. Okay. As you can see, this book is a huge book. By the way, this is just one volume only. You have other volumes. We have not opened yet. So this one volume itself, you can see that chapter 1, why Islamic economics. Then you have chapters like the dawn of economic analysis, the rise of analytical Islamic economics. Then you have Islamic economics and the first international conference 1976. So it talks about the history, the background of Islamic economics, where inshallah Dr. Salman is going to present on these chapters. Then we have the chapters, okay, neoclassical versus Islamic economics methodology. Then you have many other chapters relevant to this kind of topics, issues in Islamic economics. Basically, you will see the topics are related to monetary theory, topics related to firm behavior, and also the critique of interest, the critique of riba, and then basically all the macro foundations. Basically, many topics are there. So the question now is, okay, now going back to my slide. Now the question is, why this project? All right, why do we even call it as a project? This is, we do not want to consider as a simple conventional review. For example, students, you know that what is book review. So what is book review to you? You have done some review, isn't it? Yes. So normally when you look for the book review, it will be like a summary of the book. And then you attach your personal evaluation. It becomes book review, right? Maybe you want to publish it in some journal as, many journals, the last few pages of the journal, they always have a space for article review, space for book review, right? So it will end upon publication, that's it. It's not going anywhere. It's just simply your review. But when we call a structured review project, it's a different thing. So this one right now you are here is a structured review project. What is it actually? Here you are structuring distinguished reviewers all over the world. So we have reviewers from Middle East, Africa, Indonesia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, mashallah, yeah. Maybe Sri Lanka later, inshallah, yeah. So now we have chapters come across from the various places for just for one book. One book, let's say you have 19 chapters, we wanted actually 19 reviewers. But somehow we managed to get 12 reviewers, so we gave them multiple chapters. Because some of the chapters are relevant, related to each other. So we gave it to some people, that's more than one chapter. What exactly they have to do with that chapter is they have to do analytical critique. So we can move on. Yeah. Then they have to also standardize. They have to have a standardizing of evaluating the framework. And most importantly, they have to do the cross review, and then they have to do the editorial synthesis. So if you what you see right now in this slide, this is what actually the current landscape. Currently, what is happening is mostly we are repeating what is the conventional model. Am I right? Are we doing something new, or are we just converting those conventional model to Islamic model? So what exactly happened that currently we have a lack of structured critique. We have to critique ourselves. Otherwise, we won't be able to improve. Of course, we appreciate the Islamic economic scholars who are writing, but critiquing, doing the critics also appreciation. Am I right? It is another way of appreciating so that people can do better. So we don't have that proper strength in the generational synthesis. So this is the current landscape. So we want to bridge that into a value propositions, and this is where we want to bring this kind of structure review where you can actually talk about analytical depth, and then you can also talk about the methodological clarity, so that you can position yourself. Where you can strengthen the epistemology of your discipline. It's very important that to look into that epistemology, where exactly, because without that clarity in epistemology, you won't be able to develop the methodology. And then so the scholars, the students today, especially the postgraduate students, this is how we need to learn from epistemology to methodology, and then expansion of the discipline. So this is also an amana given to all of us. We call it intellectual amana. It's a trust and responsibility, isn't it? So the critic here, it's not that I am opposing. It's not that I hate you when I do this critic. It's not that. It's not that. It is ikhtilaful ulama rahmatan lil ummah. As there is a saying, there's a statement. When we have differences of opinion, it is always end up with peace. That is the shared responsibility to institutionalize, so that we can institutionalize whatever that we are doing in the name of Islamic economics and finance. So that is how we need to reform the discipline. Okay, moving on. So now you look at this book Mabid al-Jarhi. If you look at it, you will see the architecture of the book, like I showed you before this. You will see that there are many layers in these first volumes, starting chapters talking about monetary theory. So you have chapters on money, chapters on debt, and what is the Islamic economic perspective of this money and debt. What is this prohibition of riba? What is the purpose of this prohibition of riba? While we are introducing number of Islamic financial products, are we really going back to fulfilling the purpose of prohibition of riba, or we are just changing the name? So this is all going back to talk about the critique of interest, critique of riba, and also the book is talking about markets, and then the behavior of the market, the firm behavior, and then how the policy implications, how this policy implication should come along. The book actually talking about all this. Okay, moving on. Then this is what actually we are doing with this book. Our work is structured evaluation framework, where actually we are moving beyond the conventional review. We are going into chapter by chapter analytical critique, chapter by chapter standardizing the framework. With the help of these distinguished reviewers that you have right now, Like we have 2 sessions, morning and afternoon. So we have we have four, right? Four of them is actually going to review those chapters, and then another 5 of them or 6 of them is going to do after Jummah today. So what exactly they are looking is every chapter they are looking into this theoretical originality. The question is, does it advance the field? This kind of work, does it advance the field? Is the economics, because this book is also written by an economist, right? So is the economics robust? So to what extent the work is valid? And also the consistency that the chapter is talking, whether the arguments are holding together or not, attaching, I mean, supporting each other or not. It is also aligned with the Sharia principles, because Islamic economics, it cannot be done without the Sharia siyasa Sharia, the Sharia political, I mean the Sharia compliance, and also the Sharia oriented policy, right? So the reviewers, inshallah, the reviewer will be given 10 to 15 minutes per chapter. All right. So let's say Dr. Salman have 3 chapters, 4 chapters. You can finish within 30, 40 minutes. All right. And we are giving this time so that they can talk about the precision of the topic, and then they can also critically assess, because we also have the repertoire sitting here, Dr. Salman. We have the repertoire here sitting here. Whatever the critique that you are giving, it is actually being recorded. All right. At the same time, we also have an assessor. We have assessor in this room who is actually assessing your work as well. And then he will be also there. We will have 2 assessors for each presentations, and then the assessors will do the assessment of your work, and then also will write it down if there is any improvement required. So this will inshallah help for you to resubmit your review. I know you have submitted your review. This presentation will make it better. And after the assessment that what we are doing here, we will give you extra time to resubmit your review to us. And that review, we will be consolidating, synthesizing everything. And that review, inshallah, is going to be, it is like a recommending for the expansion. Then it is going to be a something that we can do, justice to this book. So what we are going to do is, we are going to, okay, moving on, next one. And this is what actually we are hoping through this workshop. We are hoping that this is going to happen, right? We have this panel assembly, all these distinguished reviewers, and we are doing number 2 now, step number 2, which is harmonizing through this workshop. Then the refinement cycle, this is where actually the reviewers revise, and then the editors will consolidate. What exactly going to happen after this workshop is, we can actually come up with many things. We can come up with this from this project. Number 1, we can actually have a muqaddimah to this book. We can, one of the options that we can come up with a muqaddimah of his Mabid al-Jarhi books, and we put that muqaddimah as all your reviews is going to be consolidated. We can make that happen. If not, we can actually attach whatever the review that you are doing, attach as an appendix to this book. Because you see, this book, the beauty of this book, Mabid Jarhi wrote this book. You know what he did? He did not publish with any publisher. He put it in the internet. He wrote all this book. It means from the day 1, this book is waqf. From day 1. He didn't approach any publisher to publish this book or sell this book. No, this book is completely free book. This PDF, anyone can get it, because from the beginning, when he was having a small opening for this book in Turkey somewhere, Ankara University, I think, mashallah, and then he just opened this book for everybody to use it. So that's the reason why we chose this book. We chose this book for his generosity. that he opened for the entire Ummah. And we also want to do the same so that we are actually achieving something through this workshop. And we are going to put the review whether as a muqaddimah or as an appendix, or we can do another thing which is mulakhash, they call it. Mulakhash, the summarized version of Mabid Ali book. Let's say the whole book is almost 1000 page. We can summarize everything in 200 or 100 or 200, and then this summarized one will be published under IPP. Or we can also make it as a journal symposium. We can also make it as an edited book volume. So there are so many options for the reviewers to contribute in this project. And that's how we are going to do this work. Hopefully now it's clear what exactly we are doing. So without further ado, I would like to call the first reviewer, Dr. Salman Sheikh, Associate Professor Dr. Salman Sheikh. Dr. Salman was quite generous enough to do four chapters at the same time, mashallah, the first four chapters. Alhamdulillah, thank you so much for doing this. Hopefully, inshallah, we are going to benefit from these chapters. And I know some of the chapters are very small. That's the reason why he agreed to include the chapters. So, inshallah, let us hear from Dr. Salman. فليتفضل مشكورا. Please.
Thank you to CIE and Kulliyah of Economics and American Sciences for organizing this book review workshop by an author who is very eminent and luminary in Islamic economics literature, especially when it comes to the analytical literature in Islamic economics. So if you look at the research papers and the research output by Prof. Mabid al-Jatti, he is one of the very few scholars who have contributed very analytical and even mathematical works in Islamic economics, which is quite rare to see these days. So it's a very important book for us to get an introduction to Islamic economics, and also by an author who is quite well versed in the mainstream economics and conventional economics as well. Oftentimes when we approach Islamic economics, we approach it from the Islamic worldview, Islamic sources of knowledge, and do not have as much in-depth understanding of the conventional and mainstream economics. Now, one very important thing with Prof. Mabid al-Jatti is that he is well versed in both the Islamic economics as well as the mainstream economics. In fact, if you look at his earlier works, they were very mathematical, and they can be compared to any of the, you can say, best papers or seminal papers in mainstream economics. So I would be giving a summary and few pointers on four of his chapters. These are the first four chapters of his book. So like Prof. Aslam said, that these chapters are not very lengthy, and oftentimes they are just introducing the field of Islamic economics without going too much in depth and without adding too much analytical discussion in the beginning of the chapters. But still, like Prof. Mabid al-Jatti, who is quite well versed in both Islamic and conventional economics, so he does discuss a few of the important, you can say, economic analytical points in these introductory chapters as well. So I go chapter by chapter, and so the first chapter is titled as Why Islamic Economics. Okay. Now the author has titled this chapter as Why Islamic Economics, but when we look at the content of the chapter, it is more about why we should not have mainstream economics or conventional economics, rather than giving a positive view of why Islamic economics is necessary, why it has merits, what kinds of merits, and how it can provide an alternative theoretical base as well as policy insights to conventional economics. So, like many authors, he approaches the topic of why Islamic economics through a comparative approach and goes to the critical analysis of mainstream economics and not providing as much detail on why Islamic economics. So, conventional economics, mainstream economics has so many problems, but what is the Islamic economics alternative? So, that we find to be a little bit missing in his first chapter. Another issue comes is the scope of criticism. Can you move down quick? So when we are criticizing the mainstream economics, we have to make a distinction between economics as a discipline, economics as a system, and economic policy making. Now, what he has done is he has provided pointers on each of these critical angles, but sometimes he is going back and forth. Like he is criticizing capitalism as an economic system. But then that is not to say that the economic theory is also problematic. Sometimes he is criticizing the economic theory, the demand and supply framework. Sometimes he is talking about the policy making, which is quite inept in the financial crisis, economic crisis, and so on. So these criticisms are sometimes jumbled up, and it is better to make a distinction between what is the criticism of the discipline, of the economic theory, what is the criticism of institutions, economic system, and what is the criticism on particular policies. Otherwise, what can happen is that we may compare Islamic economics theory with capitalism practice. Now, whenever we are going to compare theory with practice, we are going to find out that theory is much more idealistic as compared to the practice. Rather, when we are trying to compare capitalism practice, we have to compare it with Islamic economics practice. And when we want to compare Islamic economic theory, we have to compare it with conventional economics theory. So sometimes the criticism is not quite, I would say, rightly placed when he is criticizing the discipline as well as the system and the policy. Then another point in this first chapter is providing more substantive criticism by citations and statistics. Author refers to some scholars like Prof. Keane, but he could have mentioned a lot of critics. Some of them are Nobel laureates, but he does not mention quite a lot of them. So if we look at the literature, we find Paul Krugman, Angus Deaton, and so many behavioral economists who are Nobel laureates. They have also criticized the mainstream economics. But somehow when he is criticizing mainstream economics, he is particularly choosing a few authors like Prof. Keane, who is sometimes not very factual and correct as well in his criticism of mainstream economics, which I will discuss by highlighting few examples. Then, when he discusses the Islamic economics perspective, that perspective has to have clarity and context. Sometimes he is comparing the historical period, which was politically and economically and sociologically something we can be proud of, and then he's comparing it with the practice of today. So sometimes the Islamic economics discussion is not put in the right context. In some examples where he is able to provide sufficient evidence from the practice, he would refer to practice, but where the practice is not quite, we can say, robust or something to be proud of, he skips that. So he does not provide as much critical perspective on Islamic economics, especially when it comes to the practice and policy making as compared to the conventional economics. Then in the first chapter, he is also talking about the scope of Islamic economics and whether it should be a universal field or it should be a field which is to be developed by Muslims for the Muslims. So he thinks that there are so many issues and problems in economy and also in economic theory. And he thinks that it is better for us to specialize in particular topics, in particular problems, rather than trying to reform the whole of mainstream economics. Now, that is where there is a problem, which is that if we are criticizing mainstream economics and not providing a solid, analytical, and comprehensive framework for theory as well as policy making, then we are asking for a vacuum and we are not filling it with Islamic economics. So his approach of confining Islamic economics to particular issues and applied problems is okay for short term, but if Islamic economics wants to have a distinction and wants to be considered as an alternative to mainstream economics, he cannot avoid discussing the contents which are covered in mainstream economics, which is to explain the reality as it is and also to transform the reality in line with the revealed knowledge and the Islamic world. Then some of the criticism that we come across is quite contentious and debatable as well. Like he refers to the problem of demand curve, and he thinks that we cannot have horizontal summation of the market demand curve. But then we have to realize that when we are discussing the background assumptions, these are one, we can say, piece of information. There can be like loose ends when it comes to assumptions. But when it comes to the empirical reality, if we go by an inductive approach to look at the estimation of demand by just wanting to know the willingness to pay by the consumers, we will get a downward sloping demand. Okay. So if that is the case, then we cannot say that the demand curve is like completely non-factual and it's like false thing. So some of the criticisms also are quite contentious and debatable as well. Now, when he is criticizing the mainstream economics, he is not keeping this fact in mind that mainstream economics is also embracing a lot of ideas from other fields as well, like from institutional economics, behavioral economics as well. And now there are also inductive-based researches using randomized control trials and so on. One of the authors even got Nobel Prize just for the empirical work, no theoretical work, Dr. Banerjee. So meaning that he has to be balanced in the criticism. Like there are so many authors who are Nobel laureates, part of the mainstream economics, and they have also voiced their concerns about the way mainstream economics is taught, the way it is developed, and so on. Okay? Like Robert Solow, Joseph Stiglitz, Paul Goldman, Angus Deaton, Robert Schiller, Richard Taylor, Paul Newman. So all of these authors are also there. And they are also providing some kind of alternatives as well, like moving from general equilibrium to partial equilibrium, moving to more inductive-based researches rather than just using the deductive-based approach of mathematics. And oftentimes, for expositional purposes, for elementary understanding, mathematical models are used. But when it comes to policy, policy is not handicapped by the theoretical assumptions. So he could have been more realistic and balanced in the criticism as well. And even if he wanted to criticize, he could have referred to all these authors as well, rather than just Prof. Speaking and a few others. Now, on the side of writing, it is better to have chapter descriptions in one place. In the last subsection of the chapter, it seems the author is giving preview to some chapters, but not all the chapters. So he's not quite consistent in how he is presenting the content in different chapters. It is better to write one paragraph, then chapter summaries, or the parts including several chapters in each part. So some of the chapters, they end very abruptly, like without any conclusion, without any summary, and without summarizing the whole point. So he could have improved that part as well. And when it comes to the argument of sparsity, he is taking it almost the same way as neoclassicalism. economics. In Islamic economics literature, there is quite a lot of discussion about the difference between absolute and relative scarcity. There is also discussion on distinction between needs and wants. Needs are essential things, and wants are unbounded. So when we compare wants against resources, we may have relative scarcity, but when we compare essential wants against available resources, we may not find absolute scarcity. So, so this point could have been highlighted a little bit more as compared to the approach by the author, where he is very much taking the same view of neoclassical economics. The subsections are also sometimes quite brief. So that is also one issue. The length of the subsections is not quite uniform. In subsections, there is only one paragraph. So that could have been handled in a much better way by having balanced content in each of the subsections. And sometimes he is taking the context of USA because he has studied in USA. He has been part of the US academia as well. So sometimes he is referring to certain catchphrases, certain events which the readers may not be aware of, like freshwater economics, saltwater economics. Likewise, some of the crises like dot-com bubble, savings and loans, it does not provide any kind of a context and also not any chronological detail as to when that particular crisis happened and what was the reason behind. So like there are so many issues in the real world, but you cannot just like identify them and then think that, well, just because of these issues, we need to have an alternative, and Islamic economics could be an alternative. We have to have a very solid justification of why and how Islamic economics would be better in avoiding these things. Sometimes there is a issue with some terms as well, like some sentences require clarity. Like in one place, he is writing the sentence this way, whereas it could have been improved as well. But I would not go there. So let's go to the second chapter. I think I have to move fast. The second chapter is titled as The Dawn of Economic Analysis. Dawn of Economic Analysis. Now, when he is writing this, the title of this chapter, it seems to indicate that he would be talking about economic analysis in a universal context, not just the Islamic economics context, rather in a universal context. But when we look at the content of the chapter, he is very much focused on Islamic economics. Now, he mentions contributions by Muslim scholars in economics, but that mention is not quite comprehensive and complete. There is a passing remark on Ibn Khaldun, Shebani, but not others. Another problem is anachronism, which is that we look at history and reinterpret it. Like, for instance, when it comes to division of labor, it's a very basic idea that you cannot do everything for yourself. But have the Muslim economists discussed division of labor in a way that they were able to discuss the comparative advantage principle and its implication in trade and economic policy making and so on? Not quite. So that is the problem. Like, now we know division of labor is connected with comparative advantage and it has so many implications for trade and so on. But when he is talking about, and others are talking about division of labor, they are talking in very general terms. Like, for instance, gravity. Okay, like concept of gravity, if you would give a physical explanation of that, that is different than just saying that things fall on the ground. Things fall on the ground. Everybody knows that. Okay, so we cannot say that because in the literature somehow we can find that things fall on ground in Muslim discourse. So they like preempt the concept of gravity. So when it comes to concept of gravity, you have to explain it. The whole physics behind it and its implication in the grand design of the universe and so on. So that is another issue. Sometimes, not only by Prof. Mabid al-Jabi, but by others as well, sometimes we give over credit as well. And also, even though this is not the problem with this, but in other kinds of literature summaries, this is another issue that because there are certain scholarly, you can say, schools of thoughts, Ashariya, Maturidiyya, and so on, within fiqh as well, there are different schools. So what has happened is that some people get more credit than others. Like Ibn al-Hisham is given more credit for things which he originally did not discuss as compared to Ibn Sina and so on, Ibn Rushd and so on, because there is kind of a clash of ideas between Ashari and Mu'tazila as well. So even though this is not the problem as such in this chapter, okay, now moving on. Let me just summarize. When he is giving the analysis of economy, it is better for him to go by thematic analysis rather than chronological analysis. Because when we go for chronological analysis, then we would be not giving enough justice to the other civilizations as well, other viewpoints as well. So he takes the chronological approach rather than the thematic approach. Now, one thing that we have to be careful about, like I said, is the anachronism, which is that we should not be reinterpreting history in the light of the modern economic jargon and so on. Like we cannot say that Ibn Khaldun gave the theory of economic growth. We cannot, mention it and explain it the same way like we can explain the solar model and the Roman model and so on. So yes, we can say that initial ideas were given, and but they have to be like analyzed in a balanced way rather than giving over credit. Whereas the context of that time was completely different. There were no nation states and so on. Now he also discusses the definition and the scope of Islamic economics. That is here also there is some problem, which is that like how you would come up with a comprehensive definition as well as scope of Islamic economics. So he thinks that the scope of Islamic economics has to be quite limited. He's not willing to engage in as much depth when it comes to economic analysis in Islamic economics. So his definition is this: a discipline that studies people's behavior towards scarcity, including the activities of production, consumption, saving, investment, and trading at both the individual and social level without being encumbered by neoclassical moral values of extreme rationality and superhuman calculation. Now, this is not quite a definition of a subject. Like there is so much you can say loaded statements like encumbered by neoclassical moral values of extreme rationality. So when you're defining a subject, you cannot define it in comparison to another paradigm. Likewise, there is no mention of Islam. There is no mention of the revealed knowledge. So then it seems that the author thinks that Islamic economics would be very much like positive economics, because he is mentioning scarcity, different economic functions, production, consumption, saving, and not even discussing it in the light of the revealed knowledge in Islamic economics. Just trying to move away from neoclassical moral values of extreme rationality. Now, behavioral economics are also trying to do that. The institutional economics are also trying to do that. So there are so many other alternatives to mainstream economics than just Islamic economics. So this definition of Islamic economics is not quite comprehensive and clear. Okay, moving on. Yeah. So he discusses also the different kinds of economic crisis, financial crisis. Now here he does not provide analytical discussion of why those crises occur. So he's just listing that okay, these crises happen quite frequently, but why? And does it mean that if a crisis happens and it cannot be reversed? We cannot go back to the normal. There is so much literature in Islamic economics which talks critically about great financial crisis, but ignores the post-crisis economic boom and so on. Likewise, COVID-19, so much trouble happened in terms of fall in economic growth and so on, exports and so on. But then the recovery was also stellar. So sometimes you have to also appreciate that there is a self-correcting mechanism in mainstream economics as well. And if we are focusing on economic crisis in the West, in the mainstream economics, we also cannot ignore that these crises also have ripple effects on the Muslim economies as well. They are also not quite immune. So sometimes he is also having an unbalanced criticism of the approach of realists in Islamic finance. Sometimes he becomes like very critical to the extent that he is like, having some kind of very aggressive stance on those who are operating in Islamic finance. So he said about the Islamic finance practitioners, stardom, however, remained with Sharia scholars as they became business consultants. So comparing them to business consultants, they enjoyed a new prestige which added boldness to their fatwa. Like ancient Arab Jews, if you compare the Islamic finance Sharia scholars who are Arab Jews, they sharpened their skills in making uses. Many finance products were structured with the pungent smell and flavor of conventional finance while dressed in Islamic garb. So sometimes he's quite overly critical of the Islamic finance approach as well. There are a few points on the side of it, but let me go to the third chapter now. The rise of analytical Islamic economics. Okay, so this is the chapter 3 of the book. Now, one problem with chapter 2 and 3 is that sometimes there is so much common discussion, and also the length of both chapters is quite short. So he could have combined them in one chapter rather than having two short chapters where the discussion is also going quite in you can say parallel ways. So if there is the overlapping of points discussed in chapter 2 and 3, he could have combined them into a single chapter. Now he challenges the Schumpeter's death hypothesis and very expertly, like he is identifying the Muslim contribution in public finance, also in civilizational growth, also in political economy, also in public economics, also in institutional economics, and so on. And with his expertise in mainstream economics, he is also able to present in a way such that we are able to relate the contributions to the mainstream economics language and jargon as well. Now, when he discusses the ideas of Ibn Khaldun, sometimes he is giving, like I would say, over credit. Like Ibn Khaldun, he talked about civilizational growth and decline. But then again, the problem is that if we would take it as an economic growth theory, then the problem would be that what is the positive explanation of that theory and what is the empirical evidence for that theory. He discusses that in Ibn Khaldun's model, the population is a positive driver of growth. But sometimes it seems that he's not like giving the exact quotation of Ibn Khaldun and rather reinterpreting his ideas to suggests that Ibn Khaldun was talking about not just population but productive population. Now, did Ibn Khaldun actually talk about that, or he just referred to population? So that is the issue. Like the concepts of productivity, these are not concepts which you would find in the earlier discourse and literature. So sometimes, if we are interpreting someone's idea in the light of the modern mainstream economics, then you have to be balanced, like saying that okay, this was the actual text, and this was one implication of the text, rather than saying that no, Ibn Khaldun itself talked about productivity, and then you compare it with endogenous growth theory, and then you say that there is a increasing returns to scale. So sometimes he also mentions that Ibn Khaldun talked about returns to scale. How is it possible? It's quite difficult to understand. So another issue is the allocation of resources and the role of government. He's not quite clear on what is the role of the government. When he discussing Ibn Khaldun, he talks about the positive role of the government. But then somewhere it also seems that he is quite skeptical of the role of government as well. He thinks that if we would not have private enterprise and private profit motive, and if government would be extracting a lot of taxes from the people, then there would be no incentive for people to work. Okay? The same ideas that we discussed under the rubric of supply side economics. So sometimes he's little bit less careful in highlighting okay where governments work and where they fail. He discusses microeconomics and price theory and mentions from the writings of Ibn Khaldun that how he discussed demand and supply framework. One very important thing is that he is also able to identify the factors affecting the demand aspect. So this is something which is positive economics. Like this is not the same demand and supply in a very general way, in a generic way. Rather, he provided thorough explanation of what are the factors of changing demand. He discussed that how the economic growth would have interlinkages with labor productivity and also with wages, also with the opportunity cost calculations of the labor. So he has provided a very expert analysis on that. He also discusses the distinction between value and price, okay, like the water diamond paradox and so on. So he discusses that the Muslim economists were quite aware of the distinction between value and price. There are some points on the style of writing, but I skip them. So I move now to the last chapter, which is on Islamic economics and the first international conference. Now, one problem with this chapter is this, that he is tracing the root of Islamic economics to just one conference. Now, that is one problem, because that conference, even though it was quite comprehensive, a lot of people attended, but a lot of people could not because of logistical reasons or maybe other reasons. So then, when he discusses the outcomes of those conferences, then we do not get a very clear picture. Because on some issues and topics, there were quite a lot of papers, and on other issues and topics, there were not quite enough papers. And the papers were also quite elementary, they were not very analytical, and they were mostly just discussing uh, the explanation of the revealed knowledge rather than providing an analytical base or analytical economics from that from the understanding of the revealed knowledge. So this is one problem with this step. Like if you would do a thematic analysis, then you will be able to discuss that. Okay, not just confining yourself to one conference, rather you look at the extent literature, and then you are able to find a lot of works on the different themes. But when you will confine to a particular conference, in that conference, some issues are getting more attention, some issues are getting less attention, then you will not be able to come up with a genesis of Islamic economics, which looks very convincing to the mainstream economics people as well, and which also does not look very interesting. So rather than doing a review, which is on the basis of authors, he could have given a thematic analysis. What he is doing is he is discussing the views of different authors. Now, those authors who were not part of the conference, they did not get any mention, even though they were quite active at that time. Okay, and also this is not correct to say that the genesis of modern Islamic economics started in 76. We can say yes, the academic we can say impetus started with this, but then we have works in the 30s, also 40s, 50s, 60s, in different parts of the world, and also in practice as well. It was much going on. So we cannot say that we just had beginning of Islamic economics in 1976. He discusses about the methodology as well, but in the methodology, what he is doing is he is not providing his own analysis. Rather, he is just summarizing the works of those authors who published and presented in that conference. So this chapter looks to be a review of that conference rather than the author's own understanding of what are the new directions from that conference. So definitely the conference proceedings were published as well, and also the abstracts were published separately as well. So just providing a summary is not quite useful until unless we add something analytical to that. Again, he is not making a distinction, a very clear distinction between Islamic economics as a discipline and Islamic economics as a system. Then he is also discussing Islamic economics and the scientific method. And here he thinks that Muslim economists were very much influenced by Ibn Rushd. Now, this is very interesting because he has not provided any citation of like how Muslim economists were influenced by Ibn Rushd, and that provided impetus to their research and motivation for their research. So reference to Ibn Rushd also requires a careful demonstration of whether Muslim economists referred to his approach and how they took it forward in developing Islamic economics. So if we think that like division of labor, comparative advantage principle, demand and supply framework, economic growth theory, all of these were discussed by Muslim economists, then we should be finding other people taking up the ideas, but we are not able to show that consistently in the literature. So then it brings back the discussion that are we like reinterpreting the history in the context of modern economic terminology and so on? If that is the case, then we may give over credit where it is not quite justified. Another issue is that how you explain the deviation from the ideal behavior. Okay? Like we can talk about what is the ideal behavior in Islamic economics for the consumer, for the producer, but what if we find deviation? We have to have an explanation for that as well. That explanation would not come through the revealed knowledge. Partly it could come from the revealed knowledge because the Quran and Hadith also talk about human traits, and some of those traits have negative tendencies as well. So part of the explanation can come from the revealed knowledge, but part of it would come from the empirical evidence. So that is where we have to fill the gap, like how we explain the deviation from the ideal behavior. And also when he is discussing about the ideal behavior, he is not quite thorough. Like he discusses moderation, but not israf and tafsir. Likewise, it seems that like he is not giving complete coverage. Sometimes he's opening a lot of things, and then he's not providing like comprehensive explanation and ending to the argument. Sometimes the chapters they just finish abruptly. So these are some of the points. You know, there were few other points as well, but for the shortage of time, I would stop here. Another last point I would like to discuss is his discussion of insurance. So he discusses insurance out of nowhere. Like this comes into the discussion, whereas the chapter was not about it. So what what is the problem? Is that he looked at the research papers of that conference. The research papers which were analytical and mathematical, he got interested in them, and then he provided a summary of those papers. Now, then this kind of a summary based on cherry picking papers from that single conference would not provide a very useful thematic analysis. So that is why sometimes there is incomplete discussion on insurance, sometimes there is incomplete discussion on property rights. So it's not quite, I would say, um, very structured. So maybe he could have provided a thematic analysis, and rather than focusing on just one conference, he could have taken the benefit of the Rajatullah Siddiqui's review, which was also discussed and presented in that 76 conference. And that review was quite thematic, and he had provided a thematic review of all the papers. So that would be a better way to introduce Islamic economics rather than just focusing on the outcome of single conference. So I will stop here. Thank you for giving the time to. I was having fever, so I could not make the presentation. Sorry.
Good enough, good enough. Thank you very much, Dr. Salman. I want you to stay there for a while. Maybe we can take a few questions. So first of all, thank you very much, Dr. Salman Ahmad Sheikh, for a wonderful review presentation. We may take 5 more minutes. If there is any questions from the audience, from the students, if you would like to clarify something. We also have online audience. Alhamdulillah, the number is getting bigger and bigger. Alhamdulillah, good number. Can you open the chat? Let's see if there is any questions for Dr. Salman. You can address the question, then we go to audience here. This is from Dr. Razina. What is the meaning of over finalization of economy by Ibn Khaldun? Is it too depending on debt culture? Maybe you would like to address this question.
Yes, so when Prof. Mabid he discusses the concept of over financialization in the work of Ibn Khaldun, so he's talking about the context of the public finance. So he thinks that if the government is going for debt financing, and if the government is going for extractive taxation, then what happens is that the incentive for private sector would diminish. So very much the same concept is there in mainstream economics, which we discuss with the name of crowding out. So he thinks that if the government would be taking a lot of resources itself, then not much would be left for the private sector. So then the incentive would be killed, and then this would lead to a ripple effect in the economy, whereby the private investment would decrease, employment would decrease, and the economy would decrease as well. Economic growth would also decrease, and then this would have a negative effect on the living standard, and then this will lead to civilizational decline. But we have to be realistic as well. Like Ibn Khaldun also discusses the concept of the rural economy and the urban economy. So that is quite relevant for that time period. But if we would like take some of his ideas that the urban economies are corrupt, they are lethargic, they have labor force which is quite lazy. So he is mentioning these things with regards to the urbanization. So he thinks that civilizations prosper when they are near to like the Bedouin culture. So now this is quite problematic. Like right now we think that economic growth happens when you have large metropolitan cities and when you have so much economic activity going on in the urban sector. So what he was saying is completely different to the legacy sector model and likewise the charter cities model by Paul Romer and so on. So some of his ideas are like quite useful, but some of the ideas are quite I would not say problematic, but they have to be contextualized. They have to be looked at that particular context in that time period. So maybe that worked for that time period, but not quite useful. Like if he has said that the urban society is lethargic, lazy, And if we take the policy implication that we have to have a rural-based economy, then I don't think that this would be a very good policy step to take, especially when it is not grounded in the real knowledge. So this we have to see that Ibn Khaldun, he was talking in positive science terms. Like he was not giving his arguments from the real knowledge. So what he said were his own opinions and analysis. We can agree with points which are relevant for us, but with others we can contextualize and use it with logic.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have one more question? No. That's all, yeah? Okay, good. Any questions from the audience? If you have something, you can ask. If not, I will ask more questions. Dr. Salman, you were, I think, somewhere around in chapter 2, you were pointing out that Prof. Mabid is discussing on chronological analysis rather than thematic analysis, right? So what would you have in your mind if it's supposed to do on based on thematic analysis? So what should be the way to do that?
So in thematic analysis, what we can do is this: we take the themes of the mainstream economic textbook. Like when we approach a microeconomic textbook, we talk about the agent behavior, consumption, production. We talk about the markets, and then we also talk about the regulation and so on. So in thematic analysis, we could have like talked about, okay, what is the role of market, what is the role of government, what is the role of HISMA, and then discussing the ideal behavior expected from the
But
consumers.
that would be following the same conventional
Yeah.
economic structure, isn't it?
Yes, but it has its own strengths and weaknesses. Like one strength of this approach is that we would be able to cross communicate. Sometimes when we give a chronological detail and then somebody is thinking, well, we are referring to scholars who were living in centuries before period, so they may not be as much enthusiastic to learn from their ideas. But when we discuss that, okay, you are also interested in consumption behavior, you are also interested in consumerism and how to bring about responsible and moderate level of consumption. Now we also have a discourse which is also talking about these issues. So then we can have better cross communication and exchange of ideas. And then this can also help us develop more structured content in Islamic economics.
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much. Please give him bigger round of applause. Dr. Salman. Thank you once again. Jazakumullah khair. So our next presenter is waiting online. This is 4 chapters. Just now we saw, that's why we took few extra time. But the remaining presenters will only present in 15 minutes because they are given just only one each of them, 1 chapter, except Dr. Riyasat, who is coming next. He was given 2 chapters. Dr. Riyasat, are you online?
Yep, I just want to do an audio test. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Would you like to share your screen, like a slide, or you want us to do that?
I'll share from my end. Let me try first.
Okay, you can try. Otherwise, we also have a copy of it.
Wonderful.
Okay. Do you prefer us to do that?
Yep. Is it showing?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Good.
Okay. Something's wrong with my
Is
camera.
it chapter 15?
Yes.
Okay, good. Please go ahead. Thank you so much. Okay.
Okay, all right. There's my video as well. Okay, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, my apologies that I can't be there in person, but some health circumstances have prevented that. But anyway, the advantage is I'm able to present using a slide format, and hopefully that will add clarity to the whole session. I've put both the chapters into one presentation, okay, instead of having a break in the middle. And just to give a bit of background, both these chapters deal with interest rates, and it's a critical approach to interest rates. And let me just put some context on how I try to go about this review. I looked at this textbook. As you can see, let me just put this in presentation format. It's a bit easier for everyone. Yeah, okay. So if you can see, the book says economic analysis and an Islamic perspective. So I'm looking at it as I'm reviewing this book as something that can supplement the teaching materials that already exist, and how would I place this book relative to other teaching materials that already exist? For example, to what extent is there redundancy? To what extent is there novelty? And the other thing is, how effective the material is in terms of engaging students. So that would be the main thing. And if we're talking about the extent to which it's able to engage students, then we're looking at it as how well it is dealing with conventional economic ideas as well as Islamic economic concepts. So I kind of kept these things in mind as I was approaching, as I did this review for both the chapters. Okay, so that's a bit of the context. All right, let's go to the next slide. Hang on, how am I supposed to? Okay, there. Yeah, okay. So for both the chapters, I've taken a very straightforward approach, right? The first part of each chapter, I will talk about what is the overview. So generally, we have an idea of what is the content. And the second part will be an evaluation on, specific areas that I find relevant. Okay, it won't be as exhaustive as Dr. Salman's, because I think he was going really into minute detail. I'm focusing more at a general level of the content, right? But as I approach the end of the chapters, I will make some general comments about the overall material and things like that. Okay. So let's look at the first chapter 15 summary. Okay, and the general objective of the chapter, right, is to challenge the foundational theories of interest rates, right? And the author presents as something that exists, but they're not challenged critically enough. They're kind of accepted for granted, and conventional economists accept that, and it's there, right? And so the focus of the chapter is to try to challenge that fundamental premise, and to highlight the fact that there is something fundamentally wrong with interest rates, okay, in terms of their functionality and the way they enable the economy, right? So generally, the main point is that there isn't a natural equilibrium interest rate. Like generally, whenever we talk about interest rates, right, we always say that there are many interest rates, but there's a base interest rate, and all other interest rates are derivative of that. Okay, now generally the author says that this is just a preconceived notion, right? A theoretical notion that has been, this is the part that is accepted for granted and that isn't established enough. And he basically goes to proceed to, deconstruct this idea that there is one natural equilibrium interest rate. Finally, generally the critical aspect of this chapter, right, or at least the objective from his perspective, is to demonstrate that the link between the interest rate and time preference is non-existent. I think this is quite an important aspect to focus on, because the idea that interest rates exist is because people have a preference in terms of consumption, and because of to offset that preference, right? Like, should I consume now or later, right? The interest rate comes in. So I think it's dealing with a very fundamental issue in interest rates, and it's quite justified in doing that. Okay, so how does he approach this? He basically presents 4 conventional theories of interest rate, right? I won't, of course, be able to get into this into much detail, so I've just tried to highlight each of the points as best I could, right? And at first, he talks about the neoclassical loanable funds theory, which we all know quite well. And these, of course, he mentions the proponents, where they come from, and he talks about the basic mechanism. And then the general critique is that, it assumes that investment is primarily debt financed, right? And it doesn't take stock, or it doesn't take account that, the interest rate is determined by many other variables, which are, so basically it's an oversimplification. The neoclassical loanable funds theory oversimplifies the interest rate market, and it ignores a lot of other aspects of it, right? Which are, for example, like the common stock, or, direct partnerships, right? So this is the first part, um, the first theory, right? The second theory is Keynes's liquidity preference, which is also, to him, is a very purely monetary phenomenon, right? It is just like people's willingness to hold money, right, as opposed to, investing that money elsewhere, right? So that's the liquidity preference for Keynes. And basically the idea is that your demand, how much money people would prefer to hold in order to meet their immediate transactions and other needs, as opposed to, putting that money in the system to, for example, earn interest. So that's the liquidity preference, all right? And so he basically says that this is generally a very purely monetary, basically a generally very monetary phenomenon. And that's about it, all right? So these are the two first theories, right? And then he goes to the third and the fourth theories, right? So again, he goes into the Hixian ISLM synthesis, right? Which is supposedly an extension of the Keynesian ideals, right? So according to Hicks, initially he presented it as an extension of the Keynesian monetary system, right? But however, later on, right, even Hicks himself mentions, and this is true, that it actually adheres more in line with the neoclassical framework, right? And this is how it works generally. And this is all something that we're also familiar with, right? It's the rate which is determined by goods, bonds, money markets. Basically, it's an extension of the neoclassical framework to become more comprehensive. Finally, he talks about the horizontalists, which is the endogenous monetary theory, which is the idea of, a vertical supply curve, right? And the idea is that generally the monetary system, right, is able to set a wholesale rate based on a certain markup, right, based on credit markets and things like that. So here, the general implication is that money supply accommodates the demand, and which leads to the LM curve being a certain shape, right? In this case, horizontal. So these are the four theories, and he presents them as they are. I feel that when presenting them, there's not enough background or backdrop to why these theories are specifically there. Are there any other theories? But I think these being the dominant theories, it's fine. However, I feel that more background is necessary on when introducing each of these theories. Okay, all right. But the idea is, I think, familiarizing students with these theories. All right, and yeah. So then after that, the chapter progresses on. All right, to something called the aggregation problem. So this is where the core problem comes in, right? And as you can see on the slide, right, generally, the idea is that all these four theories, the general idea is that it leads to one equilibrium interest rate, right? However, Al-Jahri argues that, it is not possible, right, for there to be a time preference. You cannot map time preference onto interest, which is basically a monetary concept. Remember, the idea of preferences, whenever we talk about preferences in the modern economic context, right, we already know that there are so many factors, right, which I've listed below, right, according to the chapter. So one of them is heterogeneity, right? So each person has subjective utility. They have a subjective understanding of different things. And as a result, when I want even one person, right, when they're trying to differentiate between spending on one good versus spending on another good, right, they're going to be different preferences. And that leads to different interest rates. So when you look at a person and their preference for spending on different commodities within a basket of goods they have, that leads to different multiple preferences, right? And then similarly, no two individuals, right? Like I, for example, and maybe Dr. Aslam, right? When we look at when we compare the same product, we will have different orientations or preferences towards those same products, right? So heterogeneity basically means that when I look at different products, I have different preferences. When an individual looks at two different individuals look at the same product, they're different preferences, meaning that they're all very different. So at the end of the day, because of heterogeneity, right? When we talk about equilibrium, if we want to take all of this into account, right, we have to do this using a kind of matrix, right? So basically, my preferences, Dr. Aslam's preferences, Dr. Salman's preferences, Dr. Jarhi's preferences, all of them have to be like mapped according to a matrix, right? So basically, this is how he establishes that it is not possible to have one interest rate, but a collection of different interest rates which suit different people, which is basically this matrix. And that would constitute a whole thing, but it's a whole collection, but they cannot be aggregated in any sense, right? Which is the second point mentioned here, right? That we're not able to take all those things and make them into one common interest rate. It is not possible to add my preferences to Dr. Aslam's preferences to Dr. Salman's preferences and come up with one common number, right? There are just too many subjective elements there. Also, an interesting thing he talks about, and all of this, I haven't put the math in here. I can actually maybe, that'll waste time if I change the screen and go to the actual chapter itself and show you the math behind it. But these are all mathematically established as well. And he talks about how these are different parallel preferences, right? And they cannot be, put together because of their parallelity or parallelism. Yeah. Okay. Then finally, the fact that it's not possible to add these different interest rates and come up with one. But the fact that we do have an actual interest rate that is operating in the markets basically means or implies that these are basically administrative rates. And these administrative rates are manufactured, right, by the institutions or institutional settings or institutional players which are big enough that are able to do so. For example, you have LIBOR, all right, you have the 10 biggest banks or the most influential banks which set that rate. And these are based on other criteria which are not necessarily market, because if we say the market, then it has to be representative of, combined preferences or collection of preferences of everyone. But this is basically something that is being set by the institution based on the individual or a certain group's idea of what it should be. So kind of like an imposition on the market rather than a market-based system. Okay, so essentially that's how he establishes that there is something fundamentally wrong with the construction or establishment of interest rates within the conventional economic monetary systems or financial systems. So I think it's a very intuitive approach to doing that, right? So let's look at the evaluation, right? And in terms of originality and novelty, I try to maintain for both chapters these categories, right, as consistently as possible. So I think in terms of originality, I think it's quite high because looking at other conventional, other textbooks in Islamic economics, even if you look at the Islamic finance ones, they do not really take this approach. They do not talk about what is fundamentally wrong or how can we theoretically question interest rates. I think we do this at the indifference curve level, right? When we talk about subjective preferences and different utilities, and we talk about the differences between cardinal and ordinal utility, but we don't do this at the finance level. And I think that's why this really appeals to me. So I think instead of just focusing at an ideological level that interest rate is banned because we have this ayat and that ayat, I think that's all great and good and that's all really well known. But how this adds value to the current literature is it is able to bring in this mathematical logic and talk about equilibrium interest rates. I think that's a very pragmatic way to make students understand why it gives an additional basis as to why Islam, uh, is justified, for example, for interest rate to be um, questioned, right? At this level, at the operational level as well. So I think I really like this part. Then the other thing is in terms of the novelty, right? It uses the idea of an aggregation, anatomy, like I said, and he actually talks about different axioms. Here, right? These heterogeneity, aggregation, failure. The axioms are basically four axioms which kind of encapsulate those parts, right? I just kind of broke it down a bit in the review here. So I like the idea that he talks about these very distinct qualities which are mathematical, but they also are you're able to also um, get you're also able to explain them at a theoretical and a conception level. So I think this is actually quite good. And yeah, so it's an addition. It's an additional layer of analysis when we talk about what's wrong with interest rates, and I think that's good. Right, going to the next one. Um, so this part is an evaluation at the level this can apply to students. And unfortunately, I think that the content is quite high level. So we're looking at maybe third year, fourth year students, because even then, I think our Islamic economics syllabus has to supplement a lot of these ideas in the earlier parts. So I think if we want to introduce this, then like when we're teaching Islamic banking and finance, some of these things have to be established earlier on so that they can be developed, so that they can apply. So that can happen either in this book itself, or I mean, that should be done in this book, given that this book is bringing up these ideas. So I think some of these ideas are not sufficiently flushed out, right? I'll get to that soon, but generally, in terms of level, I think this is maybe third, fourth year level because, I haven't showed the math here, but generally, it talks about partial derivatives and matrices and things, which can be, which can intimidate, first year or, younger students. In general, if you look at the structure, I think there's a general flow, like you saw, right? I think it all comes together. However, a lot of background and context is missing. I think Dr. Salman alluded to this as well. Initially, when you're looking at the chapter, it looks very light, and suddenly you're like in very deep waters, and there are deep discussions and very deep concepts being brought in. And I think that can be quite intimidating. And then suddenly, again, you're at the shallow end and you're looking at an overview. So there's a lot of this happening. And I think when we're dealing with subject matter like this, there has to be a more cogent flow of like, when ideas deepen, it has to happen in a more gradual way and in a way. So I think generally overall the flow is good, but I think the background building and a lot of things have to be done to make sure that the concepts are established properly. Okay, another issue here is that I put it as the suspense because it criticizes the conventional way of establishing interest rates. Okay, however, it doesn't really position the Islamic perspective here. Actually, when I did this, I kind of did it without considering the other chapter, but the other chapter actually gets into this. And given that this first chapter is quite short, right? You're looking at about 7 or 8 pages in total. I feel that maybe this chapter can be combined, but perhaps if we add the background, like talk about conventional interest theories and talk about some of their limitations and all, I think it can be a chapter in itself. However, it is very important that we provide the Islamic alternative or the perspective here that, what does Islam say? Um, and why does it provide a better alternative in terms of coming up with you know, uh, a more functional system. Okay, so overall, then this other part is to what extent the literature, whatever he says, deals with Islamic scholars. And surprisingly, it's actually quite lacking. It engages a lot with conventional literature, but it doesn't deal directly. It does, not to say it doesn't at all, but it does, but not sufficiently, in my opinion, with some of the big names or some of the big contemporaries, in this area, especially in Islamic finance and interest rate discussions. So and one thing is that it heavily relies on his own mathematical critique, right? However, it doesn't talk about other possible critiques that exist. I think this is fair because it's a textbook, and textbooks generally might focus on a viewpoint. It's trying to sell a specific viewpoint. I think that's okay. But I still think it has to provide an overview of other things at a very surface level and say that the reason we're focusing on this is because of this and this and this. So yeah, I think again that context is necessary when presenting these ideas. So anyway, coming back to the Islamic perspective, right? The missing voices, for example, like Maududi, who focuses a lot on the morality of the interest rates, right? Then we have others like um, Siddiqui, right? And then we have Umar Chapra, who talks about the socioeconomic focus and how the Islamic financial system actually tries to leverage that perspective using Islamic financial contracts. These things are not explicitly cited, nor are they directly mentioned. Even though there might be some allusion to it, it's not directly highlighted, which I think is very important. So one thing I would propose is an integration. For example, this is not an exhaustive, list of people, but for example, going ahead with the Maududi example, we can support the critique of interest as an administrative tool, right? From a social justice lens, okay? And if we want to bring in Chapra into the chapter, we can talk about, the lack of an equilibrium rate, right? And as a result, if we go for more profit-driven measures, it can move us towards something like an equilibrium as opposed to, the subjective.
Dr. Riyasad,
Yeah.
yeah, can we finish in 2 minutes?
This is for this chapter or the whole thing?
The whole thing.
Okay, in 2 minutes. Wow.
Yeah, please.
Right. Okay, so
So
yeah. No worries. I can do it. Okay, so looking at the evaluation, overall scope and objectives, the opening context, you can say these are the key takeaways. I've mentioned this already. Okay, there's the Islamic banking link and the Islamic value system, right? The failure to derive a social interest rate could directly be linked to its prohibition of Islam in it. So these things need to be highlighted more, right? In terms of references, it uses a lot of conventional references, which is good, right? However, it refers a lot to a second volume for the macroeconomic implications. However, instead of doing that, it could also be bolstered with citations from the contemporary Islamic economists who are relevant to this specific chapter. Okay, right. So I'll summarize this in the overall conclusion. Right, this is the second chapter. Right, let's go through this very quickly as well. This is the summary. Overall idea is that again, it's continuing from the previous one, that interest rates are something that are imposed administratively rather than something that is naturally arrived at through a market process. And this is where he argues about interest rates being inefficient in general, right? And here, his main idea is that he talks about price search and search monetary conditions, which lead to interest rate inefficiencies, which actually cause, basically, it talks about how, because interest rates are inherently inefficient, it leads to problems, overall problems, and therefore minimizing or mitigating interest rates, meaning moving towards a zero interest rate policy, is actually in our best interest, which is kind of supporting the ideal that we don't want interest rates. So it's a very operational approach, again, to the idea that we shouldn't have interest rates. So how he does this is he talks about how generally the lending system, I don't need to go into this, but it's very debt-based, and that leads to financial instability, right? And then I think there's also evidence that the Islamic system, banking system, although some caveats here, it kind of was able to, its exposure was kind of minimal. Anyway, then it gets into the discussion of two inefficiencies in interest rates. One is the Friedman-Samuelson inefficiency. These are very well known, as well as the Hossios inefficiencies, right? The first one is basically that whenever you want to try and whenever there's interest rates and we're trying to manage our money holdings, right? We are not able to manage our money holdings or, manage them in a free way. We have to use resources. So meaning to say that whenever there's interest rates, and we're trying to manage our money balances, it comes at the cost of resource usage. So having no interest rates basically will eliminate those resource usages and free up those resources. That's the first one. The second one is that whenever we're trying to find optimal people to bargain with, right? Whenever we're trying to pass our money balances to somebody, another party, and things like that, we're not able to do that at an efficient way. So that basically that process of exchange is not an efficient one, right? And that's because of search externalities, right? So that's the second one. So these are the two inherent inefficiencies related to interest rates. Again, there are other interest rate inefficiencies which could be alluded to or explained, but these are the two main ones. Okay, so the idea is that, of course, we want to mitigate, as I mentioned, right? The idea is because interest rates are inefficient, we want to mitigate them as much as possible. By doing that, we can move away from this. But the idea, so then he talks about how when we do this, this can lead to a deflationary economy, and that can cause problems like that. Then he talks about the Islamic alternative, right? And he says that what we need to do is establish an Islamic alternative. And the idea is that we remove loan contracts and introduce Islamic finance contracts, which would lead to about 20 plus investment contracts to take its place in about 4 categories, right? So for example, you have profit product, sharing, lease, and agency. So he says that there would be 20 additional contracts, and this would lead to actually a lot more productive investments. These are some of the other structural changes he mentioned: central banking reform, RCDC, right? And the outcome would be that eventually this would disappear, right? The Samuelson-Friedman, as well as the Hossios inefficiencies would be removed, and that would lead to more efficient flow of markets, right? Again, originality, I think this is very good. We haven't seen an approach like this in dealing with interest rates. And the good thing is that, when we look at how the approach it's taking, instead of saying that whether interest rate is halal or haram, I mean, interest rate is haram, but it's going beyond that. It's trying to say that, look, interest rates, if you have it, it's also inefficient. The outcomes are not good, and we should try and remove them. So it's kind of an operational aspect to it as well. If you look at the pedagogical structure, again, it's kind of aimed at advanced students, right? The good thing is it has a clear flow, just like before. However, the mathematical challenges, I think these are more at master's level and things like that. So I think maybe at a conceptual level, these could be taught. Again, he talks about Hila. These things are not sufficiently justified. Again, this is the Islamic scholarship. I think it's a little better here, but it's not sufficiently done as well. There's a lot more Islamic discussion here because he's talking about an alternative. So that's fair. But I think more can be done in terms of specifically naming the founding fathers and things like that, right? So here, the analysis could be more layered by integrating these other viewpoints, especially the normative viewpoint. I think that's not emphasized enough here. Again, a critique on the Islamic banking and finance system. Overall scope, Islamic finance is presented as an effective remedy, so I think it's very clear. The student goal I mentioned already, right? Why is it economically optimal? Quality of references is fine. Again, just like Dr. Salman says, it's kind of West heavy because maybe his background and things like that. But good thing is it engages, right? It's something that tends to be lacking in our textbooks, and this is a unique viewpoint. So I think references are good, but they need to be supplemented with, Islamic versions. Final thoughts, it's unique and inspiring contribution, right? It adopts a novel approach not found in current Islamic textbooks. So I think it's a great addition to the collection of literature we'd have. The core ideas in both chapters are sound and grounded. So the approach is good. It might not be fully developed, but I don't think that's a problem in the long term. I think we just need to supplement those things. But the core ideas and the approach, I think, are very important in teaching our students. And I think it's a great addition. So overall, a great book from a great mind, and I hope we're able to, make those adjustments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Riyasat. Wonderful presentation. I like the point, especially the prohibition of riba, because when we talk about, we say what is the reason behind. We talk about illah, the reason, the hikmah, the wisdom. But you pointed out that he is also talking about the technically why it is wrong, right? The friction. That was very interesting to see as an Islamic economist talking about making the conventional economists to understand why interest should be prohibited. Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So many other
Very
things
good.
as well.
Mm.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Riyasat.
Right. Thank you very
Any
much.
other questions from the audience? If there is no question, yeah, there is one. Sister
Oh,
Sabina, there is one
okay.
question for you, Dr. Yasan.
Sure.
I'll pass the mic to her.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So since this chapter talks about interest rates, so the question that I would like to ask today is how can we really differentiate the profit rate that is used in Islamic economics or Islamic finance, and how do we differentiate that with actually the interest rates that are used in conventional financing?
Mm. Okay, so that's the that's the age-old question, right?
Tough
Like
question.
it's that's like asking me to solve the entire thing. But I think what I think uh, Dr. Jarhi is very pragmatic in the sense that he he kind of takes a chapra attitude as well. His main thing is that look, if we are somehow able to remove the loan contract and move on to Islamic finance products and we practice them the way they are supposed to, right? Like in spirit, not just going for, let's say, the debt base, but we're going towards equity modes. The fact that these are at least commodity based or asset based means that they have more of a derived value. All right. And and the main part is, like you said, like you rightly say, well, if we how do we do this? So first of all, we need a lot of institutional support. Government has to come in, do a lot of things. But again, how do they both exist side by side? I have no idea. But if you look at it theoretically speaking, right? Like if we substitute one with the other, then the latter being the Islamic banking finance tools, right? They tend to be at least a bit more objective and less subjective because they have that derived value at the base. And as a result, when you compete or when banks compete to try and give better value, we are moving towards a more constant market rate, which is less speculative, and which is derived from less speculative markets. So the idea is that if we at least move to Islamic modes, we're at least moving in a direction which is more value driven and which is more based on the real economy, as opposed to something that is very speculative in nature, which which becomes a lot more arbitrary and which causes a lot of noise, right, in financial markets. So I think in that sense it's very pragmatic, but how we get there, I don't know. It's like it's a crazy idea, but I think
It's
at
a
the
billion
theoretical
dollar
level,
question.
yeah, at the theoretical level, it's a good way to tell students that look, what we have here is not doom and gloom, because you know how a lot of us take a very aggressive stance against Islamic banking, as in aggressive meaning very critical, like, oh, it doesn't really practice things in form. But this is actually quite a good way because it says if we do things in form, then we're actually getting to a better place. So to more efficient markets, not better place, but more efficient markets, more better outcomes, right? More inclusion, real market transactions, right? Real market activity. So I think that's a very good approach. A good
Thank you.
question.
Thank you very much once again, Dr. Riyasat, uh, for this presentation. Alhamdulillah, so far we finished 6 chapters. So now I'm going to call 3 more presenters, reviewers. They have each one chapter. So I would like to invite and tell you that finish your presentation in 10 minutes so that if there is any questions, we will do in 5 minutes so that we can all go back for prayer. Before prayer, we also have lunch. All right. So let me call Sister Lutfia Huda, and she is going to present on chapter 14, transactions in Islamic unconventional system. Fadal, please come.
Yes, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much for the opportunity to presenting the book chapter review with the title Transaction of Islamic and Conventional System. Actually, before we talk about this chapter is the introduction for the Dr. Yasa chapter. That's why when Dr. Yasa chapter said what the basis of the some theoretical, this more to explain about the much approach in the term of the different kind of the banking system in Islamic and also in the conventional one. So the first thing for the next slide. Okay, for the next slide, this chapter actually consists of the 13 sub-chapter that start with the explain about the typology of transaction in all of time. But the author only focus on the real and the nominal transaction, which is the real transaction is representative of Islamic system and the real represented the Islamic system and the nominal is representative of the conventional one. So basically, the author tried to explain with the basis assumption and then try to transform it into a simple mathematical equation and try give explanation according to total cost transaction, which mark the transaction is better in the Islamic system or the conventional system. Next. So it's like just how they arrange. He arranged for the explanation. So basically, when in the Islamic system, he argued that there is only two area that allowed. First of all, the real and the semi-real transaction. But the real transaction, basically like credit, buying or buying something in the credit or spot, and then that's one the type one, and then the type two is more than how the real transaction interact with the banking. So when the real transaction interact with the banking, it will become the credit purchase. Basically, it's like common Islamic banking operate. We just give some financing and then give us some markup on that. And then in this part, the author also try to explain what the difference of the buy and purchase, which is in the conventional bank doing. So in the part of the Islamic banking doing, a lot of the total cost transaction is more lower than the BAP one. Why? Because this one, he used the assumption that Islamic banking as also a universal bank. That means it will become the supplier. So the banking, Islamic banking has can know the price in the market also. And not only that, but also compared to the BAP, when some customer want to buy something, there is a two-stage action. first of all, they should be borrow, and after that, the customer will be purchased in the somewhere about the asset and commodity. That's more inefficient. So the price it become more volatility. And also in this part, the author using the assumption floating disequilibrium, that the floating disequilibrium basically about the seller and the buyer searching the best price, but over time, but there is no equilibrium on that. Next. Oh, and also in this and also in the part of the BAP is more riskier than the CP because the BAP in terms of the default is quite high rather than the CP. So the author also argue that the CP, because the CP is more efficient in terms of the total cost transaction, the consumption, there is a lot of room consumption and investment that will be increased and will be impact on the economy. But is it aligned with the Islamic economic view, Islamic Sharia economic view? Actually, in this part, he also explained about the provision of the riba. That's why in the part of the typology, he not allowed the nominal transaction is part of the Islamic system because in that system, in that transaction consists of the monetary transaction that consists of the riba. Not only that, it also consists of the speculation. That's why it's part of the Islamic Sharia economic value. But even though she mentioned something like that, but he mentioned something like that, he forget to give some fake recommendation on that one. Why? He also mentioned about the disequilibrium, floating disequilibrium, where the supplier and also the buyer search the best price for the market, but they forget there is some wrong norm in Islamic Sharia economic that it will be can be constrained about the assumption. And also he already mentioned about the semi real category transaction, but he forget to make it too deep why this that's one no need to explain it why the different kind of the semi transaction is still need to explain it to make to different about the other kind of the typology the transaction. And actually, he also mentioned about the nominal if there is real transaction, but consists a little bit of the nominal transaction, it will be become the nominal transaction, including for example like tawaruk and ina is not still permissible. But why when it's still Islamic contract? But he not argue why is the contract it will still apply if there is still any nominal transaction on that. Okay, for this one, he gives some for in terms of the methodology. The author used the transaction typology first, and then after that, transform with the assumption into the mathematical equation and basis on the conclusion. And also, and it's easy the readers to know about the basic things why that Islamic system is more more efficient, more good rather than the conventional system. And then some weakness on that. For example, mostly in the term of the assumption. The assumption that he used is the one of them is floating disk equilibrium. So basically, the floating equilibrium is to search which best price in the market. But in the bank. So not only bank as a seller, but bank itself. So when we talk about the bank, is should be retracting. There is any money and any use or exogenous in the kind of the model, even though the bank is as a seller, as a universal bank. And also in the part of the assumption, after that, the total cost of transaction in the credit purchase is lower than the BAP one. He gives some conclusion that because it's more effective, there is a lot of the consumption room and the investment room is too jumping to make some conclusion, something like that. Because he also mentioned about the heterogeneous, and we already know about the heterogeneous is not only searching for the effectiveness, but also look at the social interaction in that area, etc. So to jumping to it will be interesting on consumption and investment is too much jumping. So for the recommendation, is need to empirical reinforcement in the contemporary Islamic banking evidence, intentional case study, and or quantitative simulation test for the CP and BAP claims. So one of the simple things is we can track for the interest part using the because he influenced a lot of the post Keynesian is we can use the stock flow consistent. So the assumption with the formula for the equation, we can make it in the accounting part. Is that any kind of the interest on there or not? And then the operating system will help transaction and integrate them into the cost or output link. The third is stagnant normative foundation. He need to make key assumption and the recommendation to Makoshik and Fake Muamala. Like I said before, even though the floating is equilibrium, the searcher of the best price in the market, but there is should be constraint that the constraint which maybe it will become the part of the Makoshik of Fake Muamala itself. And then can add one or two more methods to prove the assumption. That's one the link that I said before. And improve chapters, string and internal structure to preserve narrative coherence. Because when we look at this chapter, there is some and then we look at the reference, there is some jumping on there. There is the reference is not including on the there is the content is not including in the term of the reference. Thank you so much. That's all.
All right, thank you very much, Sister Lutfia Huda. Sister Lutfia is our PhD student from Department of Economics. And she's also the rapporteur today to combine all the comments. Thank you so much for doing this. I sense that mostly this chapter, when it talks about transactions in Islamic economic system, mostly it has to also rely on fiqh muamalat and maqasid, which you already pointed out that it is not that much related to that. So that is a very good note you have given to us. Hopefully, inshallah, we will synthesize and compile on this review. Any questions to Sister Lutfia? Okay, then thank you very much, sister. So we'll call the next presenter, the reviewer, Associate Professor Dr. Hassanuddin Muhammad Astakir. Dr. Hassan will present on chapter 13, Markets and Trading Rules. Waalaikumsalam. Yeah, 10 minutes. Okay.
Can you display the slide?
Yeah.
Yeah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. Thanks for the CIE to give me this opportunity to review such a wonderful chapter by Prof. Mabid on the market and trading groups. So first of all, this chapter is becoming an eye-opener, especially in the field of Islamic economic sites, on how the market should be functioned and the rules and regulations from the fiqh perspective as well as from the Islamic perspective, incorporate some conventional terms as well. So I was assigned this chapter number 30, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, basically, Prof. Mabid tried to come up with the appetizer in the chapter by incorporating these three elements. One is called prognosis, which is called about the future reform, and then diagnosis, which is about the market realities, and then cure is about ethical guardrails. So he tried to talk about the justice, meaning to say that the system that we are having right now, I mean, it is not really in balance. It promotes the inequality. Okay, so that's the first argument Prof. Mabid tried to come up. And then Prof. Mabid also, in the second point, he also talked about the transparency. Okay, implementing the risk management protocol to eliminate. Okay, because the current systems that the conventional sites having is like the cup, which is called fraud and Angara, and also usually. So we try to bring the concepts of transparency, okay, whereby the market should be away from all these elements. And then finally, the Prof. Mabid also tried to talk about the efficiency in this particular chapter. And then he tried to promote about the Islamic financial products that can promote the sharing of equity. It's a quite interesting chapters talking about the market integrity. But what happened in this particular chapter is that Prof. Mabid, I mean, one of my criticisms is that he failed to answer the overall philosophy behind the definition of the markets. I think in this particular chapter, he has to come up with what does that the market means, I mean, in conventional sites and the Islamic sites, he has to introduce the concepts of demand and supplies, but he didn't introduce that. He straight away jumped into the failure of the market and then how the Islamic economy can come into picture. But in order to come to that stage, we have to introduce the fundamental side. The fundamental side is what we call the definition, okay, how the market is established, the rules, and etc. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and then Prof. Mabid also tried to, claim, thereby he introduced the two important markets that we all know in microeconomics. One is called perfect competition. Another one is monopolistic competition. He said that in the modern world right now, most of the markets that we have, the market structure are maybe based on the perfect competition and monopolistic competition. So he tried to argue that because of these two structures, that's why we can see a lot of market failures, a crisis, occur. Okay. So, and then he gave more explanation, the definition, the structure, how different is this market, perfect competition, monopolistic competition, monopoly, monopoly, and etc. That's where the discussion is coming, okay? And then he tried to come up with the argument saying that, actually this part must come first. Then only that the Islamic part must come. That is another the way forward, especially in this particular chapter. Okay, just now I was saying about the definition of the market, right? So maybe the first part is a definition. Then maybe Prof. Mabid should introduce what are the market structure, okay, in the economic system, and that should become under the second section. Okay, but this one come at the later section, if I'm not mistaken, after 6 or 7 paragraph. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and then Prof. Mabid, after introduce, in this particular chapter, he talked about the perfect competition monopoly. Then he has, a few paragraph talk particularly about this, how those market structure, monopolistic competition and perfect competition can bring a disruption to the system. And Prof. Mabid talked about this price distortion, the manipulation of price discovery through the false information. Okay, this is called asymmetric information. And then you also talk about the GARA, excessive risk, introducing the gambling, like uncertainty. He gave a lot of example how the price distortion could happen, how the GARA could happen in these two particular markets, where one is called perfect competition and monopolistic competition. But my personal opinion that if Prof. Mabid can talk about monopoly, about the oligopoly, that will be add value to this particular chapter number 13. Because his main concentration is just on perfect competition and monopolistic competition. Okay, and then he also talk about the riba, okay, decoupling, separating waste from rewards, leading to the system inefficiency and wealth concentration. Next slide, please. But to be more, and the next elements in this particular chapter is that he also tried to talk about the moral hazard created by this perfect competition and monopolistic competition. One of the moral hazard is the hidden defect. He said that some sellers are trying to manipulate the price, and then when they sell the product, they they make the wrong information about the product in order to make profit out of this, So that is where, the context is violates the Quranic rules. Okay. So, the modern parallel, but of course, he talked about the Quranic sites and etc. Probably, it can bring a discussion on the consumer protection. That part is missing in this particular chapter. Okay, how the consumer should be protected. Okay, that part is missing, but it just limit the discussion into definition and the context. And then on the second side, you also talk about the gamble, selling. This is selling what you do not possess. The context, like he gave the example of lotteries, speculative derivative, that detaches the transaction from tangible asset. But it limits the discussion into the two markets. But the thing is, probably it will be good if he can give a very solid examples, like how this GARA could happen. He just gave a theoretical explanation for this. So that is another criticism I have in this particular part. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then Prof. Mabid talked about the riba and etc. Okay, and then he talked about how capital risk is the breaks. But unfortunately, he did not talk about the Makassid Sharia perspective of this. Okay, it will be good because when I review any chapters or any papers, I also try to do further investigation on that particular papers, because I also want to learn, because this is something new for me. I'm not an expert in Islamic economics, but I like to read about this Islamic economics. So my personal observation is that yes, Prof. Mabid talk about capital risk, how this can be, can be break, but probably the Maqasid Sharia should come in between. Okay, so you can see that the chain is broke, right? So Maqasid Sharia should come in between, whereby maybe Prof. Mabid can give more explanation about the preservation of property, the fairness, okay? And then how does the things, the profit sharings can promote this healthier relationship between capital and risk. Okay, next. Okay, and then he introduced about this, the discussion of the power, but just at a very basic level. Okay, and then he gave the examples. Okay, how politics play a role when running the businesses. And then he also talk about the how segmentation, okay, can manipulate the market. He also talk about this exploitation, structural monopoly and monopoly. But it will be good in this particular chapter if can give a real example. These are all just a basic example we can find in the many textbooks. But how does the things, how the distortion occur in the real case study? Okay, and relate that case study to the Islamic perspective, Islamic economic perspective. But throughout reading this chapter, I noticed one thing, that the discussion of the fiqh is very limited in this particular chapter on the markets and trading sites. Okay, it's just reading it's already over the 10 minutes. Okay, so I try to set that. Okay, when I read this particular chapter, I noticed that one thing is that it's like reading another version of microeconomic textbook, market structure. The topics on market structure. It's very basic set. Okay, next. Okay, so all these discussions are not bad. So yes, that's why I will strongly suggest. This one all I did my own readings, and then I try to add, what the chapter should be incorporate. Of course, in my detailed report, which I already submitted to the CIMB, all the reports are there. Okay, so probably someone who are not coming from the Islamic perspective, when they read, definitely it will add value to the knowledge. Okay, so maybe the chapter should be more focused on the audit side. I can't remember, but there's one surah in Al-Quran talking about the audit. I can't remember. Okay, but maybe can bring that surah, the Quranic verses in that particular discussion, and then talk about the maslahah, talk about the food items to all important communities, and then the modern era. A lot of the discussion in this particular chapter is more focused on the classical discussion, and maybe we should have a more modern discussions. Okay. Okay, next. I think it is the last one. Yeah. Yeah. Now, when I say the modern discussion, I'm referring to this. Okay, maybe from Mabid chapter, especially chapter 13, should incorporate a separate discussion on the insider trade. Should incorporate the regulation side of the insider trade. Okay, contract theory, and then plus the antitrust and law cartel, anti-cartel laws. The chapter will be complete if they have these modern discussions as well. Okay, right now the discussion is more focused on the classical ruling and some economic principle. What the chapter don't have is a modern discussion. Okay, yeah, I think the last one is. Okay, maybe this one you can see. Yeah. Okay, and then Prof. Mabid also talked about how Islamic product can promote the healthy relationship, especially on the risk sharing side. He introduced about Mudaraba, he talked about Mudaraba, Musharaka, but it will be good if he can give a real case study, how does it works, that promote the risk sharing. And he gave some EU evidence, that's the only evidence. But actually in market, we have a lot of evidences in literature. Probably the references need to be updated as well. No? Okay, next one. Okay, and then this is where I try to come up with my own analysis. I try to maybe in this particular chapter, it has to be a highlight how Islamic banks or how Islamic product can promote the stability in crisis. So this is from one of my research paper. So you can see the sukuk is more stable compared to the conventional bond. So I mean that part is also not available in this particular chapter. Okay, the next one. Okay, so probably this is the last one, right? Or we have another one. Okay, maybe you can go to the information. Okay, so the last part is that maybe in this particular chapter, addition to the modern discussion, maybe there should be more discussion on the Islamic REITs, venture capitalists, and more case study in this particular chapter. Therefore, this chapter will be complete, FIC, and then some real application or real case study, a discussion on the modern, what we are using it right now. Okay, I think I took about 30 minutes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hassan. That's a really very good summary and also critique and evaluation of this particular chapter, markets and trading rules. What I can understand that there are some fiqh based discussions are there, but not too deep.
Yes.
At the same time, there is also not there are some modern modern attentions given, but again, it's not good enough to see. So we need to balance it both side. So that's very good observation. Thank you very much. So I think if there is no question, do you have a question?
No.
Yeah, what is it?
The Quranic verse which you
Yes, which surah it is?
it is
About
from Surah At-Tawbah.
Yes,
Surah At-Tawbah, talking about hoarding.
Yeah.
We have a Hafiz al-Quran. We have a Hafiz al-Quran in this room.
Yeah, I forgot the
What is the ayah?
يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن كثيرا من الأحبار والرهبان ليأكلون أموال الناس بالباطل ويصدون عن سبيل الله
Talk about body,
Yeah,
right?
والذين يكنزون
يكنزون
الذهب والفضة ولا ينفقونها في سبيل الله.
Just for your information, I tested that question in the final exam, monetary economics. But I forgot to,
Good. Thank you very much for the ayah, reading the ayah Surah At-Tawbah. Thank you so much, Dr. Hassan, once again. Okay, so we have now the last reviewer for this session. We have, of course, we have one more session after prayer, right? So the last one is Dr. Intan Zanaria. She will present on consumers' behavior. Okay, Dr. Intan, 10 minutes. To 10 minutes. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullah. Okay, I think because of the time limitation, actually the structure of my presentation is first summary and then the comments. But I think because of the time limitation, I have to combine both of them together. Yeah. So I'm not going to follow strictly my slides. So I may pick some summary and then I comment, pick some summary and then comment. That's my way now. The time limitation. So next. Okay, so my chapter assigned to me is specifically consumer behavior. The first part of the chapter, Al-Jarhi did comment about the neoclassical theory of consumer behavior. So these are the typical comments that we can find from this chapter. So the neoclassical assume perfect information as rationality. There's always exists equilibrium. But those assumptions are unrealistic and unsuitable for the real market. So he says that he seeks for the realism and institutional reform. So here, he focuses on the price behavior for the consumer behavior theory. And then the next part of his this chapter, he talks about consumer decision making model CDM. And then he did introduce some existing models. This model basically comes from marketing literature, which is more, to his point of view, is more realistic compared to utility maximization or maximization. And here in the consumer decision making models, he did state some model, existing model from the Western country, let's say the Kulliyah model, angle colored and black hole model, Howard's and Shah's model, and also McCarthy model. So the idea about the consumer decision making models, which is not which is of course posing the neoclassical basically shows the importance of information processing and passage. Okay, and then incorporate some of the model existing model which is in contrast with neoclassical, incorporate psychological, also social influences and some other things, and also introduction of Homo ordinaris as opposed to Homo economicus of neoclassical. And then unlike neoclassical, because neoclassical we always assume that everyone is rational, but for realistic nature of consumer behavior, he says that we must have bounded rationality because not all the time can be rational. Okay, and then we have limited and changing preferences also. Limited could be because of time, geographical location, and many things. And then in the price setting model of consumer behavior, he says also that because we need to get some information before we can decide to buy or not. Information could be price or the type of products, anything, any kind of information. The search for information is very costly. And then whilst searching for the product and looking for the price and whatnot, the interaction with other consumers and also suppliers are important here. Okay. But my comment here is that when these kind of models are introduced, right, let's say Kulliyah model, angle, and whatnot, for the consumer decision making model, although it is not similar to neoclassical, but still there are some problems here because some of it still remain linear in terms of explanation, which is not very realistic also in reality. And some still have some strong rationality assumption and are complex and very difficult to test. Okay, but then at least at this point, try to deviate from neoclassical, which is more unrealistic. Okay, next. For this chapter also, I need to go back to the CPM. You don't have to go to this one. The author Al-Jarhi is very thoughtful and very ambitious in attempting to reconsider new theory of consumer behavior by shifting to realism. Okay, and he relates it with Islamic economics and because neoclassical, like I said, is not realistic. In Islamic economics, it emphasizes on realism. It also recognizes bounded rationality, and also because we are just human beings, perfect information is almost impossible, isn't it? So in Islamic economics, we accept imperfection. Okay, and also one more distinctive thing about Islamic economics is that because it focuses on ethical and also social dimension. So the next part of this chapter for the consumer behavior is also relates with the market structure here. So when the consumer tries to search for the product, getting the information about the price and whatnot, to make it more realistic, consumer usually perform the searching activities in the localized submarket. Okay, let's say submarket is just a shop in the neighborhood area. You don't go if you live in Gombak, you don't have to go to Negeri Sembilan just to get the same product, isn't it? So it's more localized basically. So that is this conjecture. And because of that, it makes the process of searching, because it involves of course if you go from one geographical location to another one, it involves limitation of income and accessibility. All right. Meanwhile, of course, we have interaction between supply and also consumers. So firms use cost-plus pricing, then adjust by trial and error in the market. As a consequence, because of localized market, because different markets, you have heterogeneity and so many differences. All right. And after this, you're going to see demand theory, it also relates with the time. there's no equilibrium granted actually in the market. Okay, so unlike neoclassical, we see that we reach equilibrium. All right. The next part of this chapter is that from the consumer behavior that he discussed, then he come up with the demand theory. Still downward sloping, but then he come up with a generic mathematical function that shows why it is downward sloping plus some other determinants. So, but he states the determinants here, not as many as as what we saw in other conventional textbook, right? So the quantity demanded here depends on the price of the good itself, and we know that it's negative naturally. And then real income, as long as the product is normal, then the relationship is positive. And then he added one more. It also the quantity demanded here also depends on time. Okay, so this is where the search effects come into the picture. But then, what I like to comment about this part, when he shows the generic function, is not a very rigorous function. Basically, I get to know that this book is for postgraduate level, right? So when I see the function, it's not very detailed. For instance, okay, for the time, for instance, he says that um, the way we demand product, it depends on the time, and the time also depends whether the product is based on the season, based on the searching information time, and also the income available during the certain period of time. But then he focuses more on the searching information in terms of, when it relates with time. So I did some experiments last few days by giving this chapter to some of my students, one student postgrad, two student undergraduate, just to see what they understand from this kind of writing. All right, and then they say that because these students, the undergraduate students are the final year students basically, so they already knew the basic thing about consumer behavior and whatnot, and plus they are very good students. So when they read it, it's kind of vague. So it's not only my feeling that the equation is very vague, not very clear and whatnot. So I think there's a room improvement for this because the technical part of it is very shallow basically. So for a textbook, for postgraduate textbook, I would prefer it to be very detailed, but I think this one needs more study. Okay, and then next. All right, so the price setting behavior basically he tries to replace the utility maximization. Like I said earlier, rejects the perfect equilibrium because sometimes equilibrium cannot be reached. All right, emphasizes on the imperfect information. So because time is included as a determinant here, so there is interaction into the demand theory. All right. But like I said, because is still not very clear and whatnot. So this theory, the new demand theory proposed by him is just basically a candidate for broader discussion. We can't really take it as a final doctrine. Okay? And I don't want to take too much time because the rest is just repetition. But then other things about this chapter is that the technical development for consumer behavior theory in this chapter is very limited, need further development. All right, although the theory itself is very rich. All right, like I said, because it's just a generic function, the mathematical derivation is not fully rigorous, especially when it comes to the time determinants. My feeling, and when I also ask my students, they say that because it's not very clear in terms of time, what are the other the determinants that affect time, therefore affect the quantity demanded, they would like to suggest the author that if the author can really decompose the determinant into subsections so that the textbook becomes, easier to read for the student regardless the level of study. All right, which I agree also. All right, so other things, these are just the explanation in the textbook. All right, and because of the different when it comes to searching for information and also localize the submarket, localize and submarket itself. Therefore, we could expect that different individuals may have different preferences for even for the same products. So the heterogeneity is there. So it's almost impossible to aggregate, to get the aggregate demand here. Until the end of the chapter, I can't find, any ways to aggregate the demand. Okay, so it's not as simple as neoclassical here. So I think this bit has to have some development. And then there's, I think, and it needs the chapter here, all right, it doesn't have empirical validation. Okay, it doesn't have empirical validation. It has a mathematical equation to explain, but it doesn't have empirical, at least casual empirical investigation, just to show that yes, this really exists. Okay, so to make it stronger, all right, it needs stronger formulation of theory, and then it needs provision of empirical grounding. And furthermore, for every discussion, technical part of discussion, if it is possible to relate with Islamic economic part of the consumer behavior, so that it becomes clearer what's the role of Islamic economics for each of the part of the consumer behavior. Because it says that Islam is like this, Islam is like this for consumer behavior, but it doesn't really relate for every single part. You know what I mean? Yeah. So then when the student read it, they said that we just see technically separated from Islam. You have one segment of Islam, but then how it can be related to another subtopic of technical part of consumer behavior. All right, I personally read this chapter for more than 8 times. Okay, because one I could understand, it looks like a draft to me. Okay, I think some of the review also feel the same. All right. For the 8th time after that, just to get some idea, because sometimes it's about consumer behavior. Suddenly another paragraph talking about equilibrium. Suddenly come back to consumer behavior. I was like, okay, so why equilibrium is there? All right. So then I had to read, the 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 next 2 chapters just to understand my chapters, the firm behavior, the SAFA theories and whatnot, just to see the link. And then the previous chapter, then only I can get what does it mean by my chapter here. So I think the synchronization, I think, in terms of writing is there. So I don't know, because I never worked with him personally, had some chance to sit together for lunch during conference, that's all. But I think I would suggest if he could co-author with somebody else.
Yes.
All right, so that because I understand he's quite old,
That's right.
so
Thank you.
that's it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Intan. That is a very honest review, I would say, because we also felt the same way at the beginning when we want to plan this structure review. So one good thing that we did was when we approach the reviewer, we don't just give them just one chapter. This is the chapter you go through. We give them the whole book, and then we give them the preliminary pages. We also give them the list of chapters, the other chapters available, because of course, a scholar like 80 plus, I think, right? Am I right, from Norma? 80 plus, he is 80 to 90 maybe. He is very old scholar, but it's been there for many years talking about this. Alhamdulillah. So of course, this is something that we have to. That's why the structure review is playing an important role in this, to listening from different types of reviewers, different types of approach, and your concern and your feedbacks are very important for this project. Thank you very much. With that note, we conclude now this session, and we have lunch preparation at CIE. So we still have 27 minutes to Adhan. So we can have a very good lunch before we go to Jumu'ah prayer. After prayer, 2:45, we will start at the same place. We are going to keep the Zoom on. We are not going to close it. So you can come back the online, you can the online audience. Thank you very much for joining. So please come back after the prayer. And after the prayer, we have very interesting chapters. The first one is our Dean, Professor Reiruz Asmi will be presenting. So we wish you all come back. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.